It was one of those nights that felt heavier than it should have. The air outside was cold, sharp enough to sting the skin, and inside, the silence between us felt worse. I could tell something was off with Ethan. He'd been pacing, his jaw tight, eyes darting anywhere but at me. I tried to ask what was wrong, but he cut me off before I even got a full sentence out. Then he said it. "You're just baggage, Claire. You've held me back long enough." I stood there frozen, trying to process the words. Baggage? After everything I had done for him, after every sacrifice, every night I stayed up helping him study, every bill I paid when he couldn't? My throat tightened, and my voice barely came out when I asked, "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer. He just grabbed my coat, shoved it into my hands, and told me to get out. At first, I thought he was angry and just needed space, so I tried to calm him down. But his eyes were cold, like he wasn't the same man I married. He said, "You're always around, always needy. I can't breathe anymore." Before I could react, he opened the front door, pushed me outside, and slammed it shut. The sound of the lock clicking hit me harder than his words. I stood there for a few seconds, stunned. The cold wind hit my face, and my hands shook as I realized I didn't even have my phone charger or jacket, just my purse. I knocked once, then again. He didn't answer. The porch light turned off, and I knew he wasn't going to open that door again. I walked down the driveway, my legs trembling, my breath visible in the freezing air. It was late, close to midnight, and I had nowhere to go. I sat on the curb for a while, just staring at the house that used to be ours. The same place we built together from nothing. The same porch where he once promised me that no matter how hard life got, we'd face it together. Now, I was standing outside that life like a stranger. Eventually, I called a cab and went to a small motel a few miles away. The driver didn't ask questions, just looked at me in the mirror with quiet pity. When I got to the room, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let the tears come. I didn't understand how love could turn into something so cruel so fast. That night, I didn't sleep. I just kept hearing his words on repeat. "You're just baggage." I wanted to believe it wasn't true, that maybe he said it out of anger. But deep down, I knew. He meant it. And that realization broke something in me. I didn't know it then, but being locked out that night wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to me. It was the moment I began to find out who I really was. The signs had been there for months, but Claire kept trying to ignore them. Ethan's phone was always face down. His texts came with quick swipes and hidden smiles, and his after-work meetings started lasting longer and later. Whenever she asked where he'd been, he'd sigh and say she was imagining things. He'd look her in the eye and tell her she was overthinking, that she was being clingy again. And for a while, she believed him. She wanted to. But one morning, while cleaning out the car, she found it, a folded piece of paper wedged between the seat and the console. It was a hotel receipt from a place downtown. At first, she told herself it could have been from a work trip. But when she looked closer, her stomach dropped. It had his name, Ethan Brooks, printed clearly, and underneath, a second name, Maya Collins, his new co-worker. Her hands shook as she held that piece of paper. Maya was the woman he'd mentioned a few times, smart, funny, great at her job. Claire had even met her once when she dropped off lunch for Ethan. She remembered how Maya smiled at him, a little too warmly, and how he smiled back like no one else was in the room. When Ethan came home that evening, she didn't wait. She showed him the receipt and asked, "Why is her name on it?" He looked at it for barely a second, then smirked. "You went through my car?" he said, his tone sharp. "I was cleaning it," she replied, her voice trembling. "You said you were working late that night. Were you with her?" He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "So what if I was?" Claire felt her chest tighten. "Ethan, are you serious?" He laughed, not nervously, not out of guilt, but like she was the punchline to a cruel joke. You really think you compare to her? She actually has something going for her. You're just baggage. I've been dragging you around for years." She stared at him, speechless. The man she had once believed in was looking at her like she was nothing. The laughter, the coldness, the complete lack of shame. It was worse than any confession. Claire tried to gather herself. "I gave you everything," she whispered. "I believed in you when no one else did." He rolled his eyes. "Yeah, and now I don't need that. I'm finally moving up, and you don't fit that life anymore." When she didn't move, he snapped. "Get out." Claire refused. "This is my home too, Ethan." But he didn't care. He walked into the bedroom, grabbed her suitcase, and started stuffing her clothes inside, carelessly, angrily. She tried to stop him, but he shoved the suitcase into her arms, opened the door, and pointed outside. "Don't make this harder," he said flatly. "Just go." She stood there, tears in her eyes, still hoping he'd take it back, that maybe he'd see what he was doing. But he didn't. He slammed the door shut again, this time making sure it locked. As she stood outside, holding that half-filled suitcase, Claire finally understood. The man she thought she knew had been gone for a long time. The first few weeks after Ethan threw her out were the hardest of Claire's life. She had nowhere to go, no real plan, and barely any money left in her account. She rented a tiny apartment 2 towns over, a place with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet, but at least it was hers. The nights were long and quiet, and sometimes she caught herself reaching for the other side of the bed, only to find cold sheets. She got a job at a local diner, working double shifts just to stay busy. The pay wasn't great, but it kept her from thinking too much. People in town recognized her sometime. They whispered when she passed, "Didn't her husband leave her?" Or, "She used to live in that big house." Every word stung, but she kept her head down and smiled through. She wasn't going to let their pity define her. Slowly, things began to shift. She started saving a little from every paycheck. She'd make coffee at home instead of buying it, skip meals out, and walk instead of taking the bus. Every dollar mattered. After a couple of months, she used part of her savings to enroll in evening classes for interior design, something she had always loved but never had the courage to pursue while she was with Ethan. He used to call it a silly hobby. Now it became her way forward. Claire spent her days serving customers and her nights learning color theory, design software, and home styling. She was exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from rebuilding instead of breaking. She began taking small freelance jobs, helping neighbors decorate their living rooms, advising on paint colors, rearranging furniture. Word spread about her eye for detail and her gentle patience. For the first time in years, people respected her for what she could do, not for who she was married to. By the 6th month, her life looked different. She wasn't rich or fully healed, but she was independent. Her apartment felt brighter now, decorated with secondhand furniture she'd repainted herself and thrifted art she hung on the walls. Every inch of that small space told her story of survival. One morning, while scrolling through real estate listings to find potential design clients, she froze. Her old address, their house, appeared on the screen. Her heart raced. There it was, the big white house with the blue shutters, listed for sale. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then she clicked on the details, her stomach tightening. The seller's name read Ethan Brooks. Claire leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. Her hands trembled slightly. The man who once threw her out of that very house was now trying to sell it. She didn't know why, but she knew one thing for sure. Fate had just brought her face to face with a past she never thought she'd revisit. Claire stared at the listing for a long time before finally deciding what to do. She told herself it was just curiosity, that she only wanted to see what had become of the house she once called home. But deep down, she knew there was more to it. She needed to see him, not to beg, not to cry, but to face the person who had thrown her out like she was nothing. She called the real estate agent and booked a showing under a fake name. The day of the visit, she put on a simple gray dress and a soft smile. Her hands trembled slightly as she drove down the old familiar street. Every turn, every tree, every mailbox reminded her of the life she had left behind. When she finally pulled up to the house, her chest tightened. It looked smaller than she remembered, and the paint had started to fade. The garden she once took care of was dry and patchy. She took a deep breath and walked up the path. When the door opened, she expected to see a stranger, maybe another agent. But instead, it was him, Ethan. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked shocked, his confident posture faltering. "Claire," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "What are you doing here?" She forced a calm smile. "Just checking out the property. It looks familiar." He tried to laugh, but it came out awkward. "You're looking to buy?" "Maybe," she said softly, stepping past him. "If the price is right." As soon as she walked inside, her heart twisted. The house that once felt so full of life now looked empty and worn out. There were unpaid bills scattered across the counter, empty wine bottles near the sink, and dust collecting on the furniture she had once polished every week. The curtains she had chosen with so much care hung unevenly. She noticed women's shoes by the door, small, stylish, unmistakably Maya's. So she was still around, or at least had been. But something told Claire that the sparkle had faded. Ethan followed her as she walked through the house. "It's, been hard keeping up with the place since you left," he said, scratching the back of his neck. Claire stopped and turned slightly, her voice even. "Since I left? You mean since you locked me out?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, he didn't have a slick answer. She continued walking, running her fingers lightly along the wall. She could still see faint marks where their wedding photos used to hang. It didn't hurt like she thought it would. If anything, it felt distant, like looking at a picture from another lifetime. As she toured each room, she realized how much had changed. The man who once acted like he had everything under control looked smaller now, defeated. His expensive suit couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes or the tension in his jaw. When she finished, Claire thanked him politely and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she glanced around one last time. The house felt cold, not because of the temperature, but because the warmth she once gave it was gone. She stepped outside, breathing in the cool air. The past no longer hurt the same way. Something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she didn't feel like the woman who had been left behind. She felt like the one who had finally moved on. Claire walked slowly through the house, pretending to examine every corner like a potential buyer. Ethan followed her closely, trying to act casual, but she could feel his nerves. His voice was softer than she remembered, unsure. Gone was the arrogance, the confidence he once wore like a badge. She decided to test the waters. "So," she said lightly, looking at a wall that needed repainting, "is it just you living here now?" He hesitated. "Yeah, for a while it was different. But things changed." Claire turned slightly, raising an eyebrow. "Different how?" Ethan looked down at his shoes. "Maya's gone." The words came out flat, almost embarrassed. Claire didn't react, though her heart sped up. "Oh, I thought she was the one who made your life perfect," she said quietly, still examining the wall. He gave a weak laugh. "Yeah, well, turns out perfect doesn't last." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She left a few months ago. Couldn't handle the stress." Claire glanced at him. "Stress?" He sighed, finally giving in. "The company let me go. There was some issue with the deal I made. They called it unethical." His tone was bitter. "I guess they needed someone to blame." She stayed silent, letting him talk. He kept going, as if he had been holding it in for months. "After that, things went downhill. I tried to start over, but clients backed out. Money got tight. The mortgage payments fell behind." He gestured vaguely around the room. "Now the bank's breathing down my neck. I'm selling before they take it." Claire listened quietly, her face calm, though inside she felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and something else. Maybe relief. She didn't need to say anything. His situation said enough. Karma had done what she never could. The man who once told her she was baggage was now weighed down by his own choices. He finally looked at her, his eyes tired. "Funny, huh? You always said to be careful with money. Guess I should have listened." She smiled faintly. "Guess so." For a moment, silence filled the room. She could feel him watching her, maybe waiting for sympathy, maybe hoping she'd offer some kind of comfort. But she didn't. That wasn't her role anymore. Instead, she walked to the kitchen counter where stacks of unopened letters sat: bills, foreclosure warnings, final notices. She placed her business card gently on top of them. The white card looked clean and new against the mess. It read, "Claire Matthews, Interior Design Consultant, turning broken spaces into beautiful beginnings." She took one last look around the house. "You should repaint the living room before showing it. Buyers notice things like that." He nodded slowly, his pride fading completely. "You've really changed," he said quietly. Claire met his eyes, her voice calm. "I had to." Then she walked out, closing the door behind her. She didn't look back. For the first time in a long while, she felt free, not because Ethan was finally losing, but because she no longer needed him to. 2 weeks passed after that visit, and Claire had pushed the encounter out of her mind. She was busy with clients, balancing small renovation projects and consultations, feeling proud of how far she had come. Her phone rang one afternoon while she was sketching design plans at her desk. The name flashing on the screen made her freeze: Ethan. For a moment, she thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of her. She answered. His voice was low and hesitant. "Claire, I know this is strange, but I need your help." She kept her tone neutral. "With what?" He cleared his throat. "It's the house. The agent says it won't sell like this. It looks too empty, too cold. You're good at what you do. I'll pay you if you can stage it for potential buyers." Claire almost laughed. The same man who once mocked her dream now needed her to make his home look beautiful. She let a small silence hang before replying. "You could have hired anyone." "I know," he said quickly, "but I trust your style. You always knew how to make things look right." For a second, she thought about hanging up, but something in her chest told her this was her chance. Not for revenge, but for closure. "Fine," she said at last. "I'll do it. Send me the keys and timeline." When she hung up, she felt calm. Not angry, not bitter, just ready. The next day, Claire showed up at the house with her toolkit, samples, and a plan. Ethan was already there, standing awkwardly in the doorway. He looked older, worn out. "Thank you for coming," he murmured. "I'm here to work," she said simply. From that moment on, she treated it like any other project. She walked through the rooms, making notes, ignoring the memories that clung to every wall. The living room needed warmth, so she brought in soft lighting and plants. She changed the curtains, added rugs, and repainted the dull walls a warm beige. In the kitchen, she replaced clutter with simple, fresh decor: a bowl of green apples, clean towels, and a bright centerpiece. Every touch she added erased a little more of the pain that house had once held. Ethan watched her work from a distance. Sometimes he tried to talk, asking if she remembered a certain piece of furniture or a color she'd once loved, but she didn't engage. She stayed polite and professional. No small talk, no memories. By the third day, the transformation was nearly complete. The cold, lifeless house now looked open, welcoming, full of light. Even Ethan seemed stunned when he walked through it. "It's beautiful," he said softly. Claire nodded. "That's the point." He looked at her for a long moment. "You really don't hate me, do you?" She met his eyes calmly. "I don't have time to hate you." That night, as she packed up her things, she looked around one last time. The same house where she once cried outside in the cold now stood spotless, peaceful, like it had been reborn. And in a way, so had she. Claire finished the final touches in the living room, just as the buyers arrived. The sun poured through the windows, lighting up the calm colors and the fresh flowers she had arranged. The couple walked through the house slowly, admiring everything. They complimented her work again, and Claire answered each question with confidence. Her voice was steady, her smile genuine. She looked every bit the professional she had worked hard to become. Ethan stayed in the background, quiet and tense. He didn't say much as the couple toured, but his eyes followed her every move. The same woman he once called unambitious now spoke with grace and authority, completely in control of the moment. The buyers seemed impressed by both the home and her design. When they finally said they wanted to make an offer, higher than the asking price, Claire simply nodded and thanked them warmly. Once they left, the silence between Claire and Ethan felt heavy. He stared at her for a long moment, his usual confidence gone. There was no arrogance in his face anymore, only regret. He finally said in a low voice, "I didn't deserve you." Claire looked at him calmly. There was no anger, no pain, just truth. "You're right," she said softly. "You didn't." She gathered her things and placed the check he'd written for her service into her bag. Ethan tried to say something else, but she stopped him with a small smile. "Take care of yourself, Ethan," she said simply. Her tone was polite, almost kind, but it carried a finality that made him lower his eyes. As she walked toward the front door, she glanced around the house one last time. The rooms no longer held the memories that used to haunt her. They were just walls and paint now, her work, her craft, her proof that she could rebuild beauty from ruins. Outside, the air felt fresh. She could hear Ethan's footsteps behind her, but she didn't turn around. When she reached the door, she stepped through and closed it quietly. Then, for the first time, she locked it from the outside. The sound of the latch clicking shut was soft, but it felt powerful. She walked down the front path toward her car, each step lighter than the last. The house, once a symbol of pain, was now just another project completed. She had come full circle, and this time, she was the one walking away on her own terms. As she drove off, she didn't look in the mirror. There was nothing left to see behind her, only a future waiting ahead, and the peace that came with finally letting go. With the money she earned from selling Ethan's house, Claire finally took the step she had dreamed of. She opened her own interior design studio and called it Second Chances Interiors. The name meant something deep to her. It was about rebuilding, starting over, and creating beauty after loss. At first, she worked alone from a small rented space, taking small projects and relying on word of mouth. But soon, people began to notice her work. Her designs had warmth and meaning, something that came from experience, not just skill. Clients loved her calm nature and the way she listened. She helped people turn their broken spaces into homes that felt alive again. Every project reminded her of how far she had come, from the woman who once cried in silence to the one who now created peace for others. Her story spread quietly around town, and soon she was invited to design for cafes, offices, and even small hotels. Her confidence grew with each project, and so did her reputation. Months later, she signed the lease on a cozy townhouse, her own space fully hers. It wasn't big or fancy, but it felt right. She painted the walls herself, hung light curtains that danced with the breeze, and placed soft plants by the window. Every corner reflected who she had become, independent, calm, and proud. Each morning, she made her coffee, opened her laptop, and worked on new designs with quiet joy. Then one afternoon, she found a letter in her mailbox. The handwriting made her pause. It was Ethan's. She stood still for a moment before opening. The letter was short. He said he was leaving the state. His business had failed, the house had been sold, and he was starting over somewhere far away. He wrote that he was sorry for the words he said, for the way he treated her, and for not realizing her worth until it was too late. He ended by saying he finally understood what he had thrown away. Claire sat quietly for a while after reading it. There was no anger in her heart anymore, just a calm acceptance. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't forgiveness he needed from her, it was forgiveness he needed to find for himself. That evening, as the sun set through her window, Claire smiled softly. She had found her peace, not through revenge or regret, but through growth. Her new life was built on strength, not sorrow. Second Chances Interiors wasn't just a name anymore, it was her truth. She had given herself the second chance she once thought she'd never have. A year later, Claire attended a charity event for local businesses. It was one of those evenings filled with laughter, light music, and people showing off what they'd built. Her company, Second Chances Interiors, had sponsored a small booth, and she was proud to see her name printed on the event banner. As she moved through the crowd, greeting clients and other designers, she suddenly froze. Standing near the refreshment table was Maya, the woman who had once replaced her. For a moment, both women just stared at each other. Maya looked nervous, even a little lost. She was thinner than Claire remembered, her smile uncertain. Claire could have walked away, but instead, she approached her with quiet confidence. "Hi, Maya," she said kindly. Maya blinked, surprised. "Claire, I didn't expect to see you here." Her voice trembled slightly. She looked down, fidgeting with her glass before whispering, "You look good. Happier." "Thank you," Claire replied softly. There was no bitterness in her tone, just calm. Maya hesitated, then sighed. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice heavy with guilt. "Back then, I thought I was taking your place. I thought I was the lucky one, but I wasn't. Ethan, he didn't change. He just found someone new to blame. I was just the next in line to be broken." Claire listened quietly. There was no satisfaction in hearing it, only understanding. She could see that Maya had already paid her price in her own way. After a moment, Claire said gently, "You can't take what's already left." Maya looked up, confused for a second, then nodded slowly as tears filled her eyes. "I guess you're right," she whispered. They stood in silence for a while before Maya excused herself, and Claire watched her walk away and realized that for the first time, there was no pain left inside her. No anger. No need for revenge or justice. It was all gone, replaced by peace. That night, as she drove home, she thought about how much she had changed. The woman she used to be, desperate for love, desperate for answers, was gone. What remained was someone stronger, kinder, and whole. When she got home, she lit a candle, sat by her window, and smiled. Life had come full circle. The past no longer had any hold over her. She had learned that healing wasn't about seeing others suffer. It was about finding peace within yourself. Meeting Maya wasn't painful. It was freeing. Claire finally felt that every part of her story, even the hard ones, had brought her exactly where she needed to be. She wasn't the woman left out in the cold anymore. She was the woman who had built her own warmth. One kind choice, one brave step, one peaceful heart at a time. Months later, Claire sat at her desk, sipping coffee and looking out the window of her new office. The morning sun poured through the glass, lighting up the clean, open space she had built from scratch. On her desk was the latest issue of a local lifestyle magazine, the one featuring her. The headline read, "From Rock Bottom to Rising Star, How One Woman Rebuilt Her Life from the Ground Up." When the article came out, her phone had been buzzing all day. Clients, friends, and even strangers reached out to congratulate her. They called her story inspiring, brave, and full of hope. But to Claire, it was more than a story. It was proof that pain could turn into purpose if you didn't give up. She ran her fingers over the glossy page and smiled. The photo showed her standing in her studio, surrounded by samples of fabrics, color boards, and bright, open spaces. She looked confident and calm, the kind of woman who had finally made peace with her past. After framing the article, she hung it on the wall behind her desk. Every time she looked at it, her mind went back to that cold February night, the sound of Ethan's voice still sharp in her memory. "You're just baggage." The words that once broke her now only made her stronger. Sometimes, during quiet afternoons, she'd glance at that frame and whisper under her breath, "Guess this baggage learned how to fly." Her business, Second Chances Interiors, was thriving. She'd hired 2 assistants, taken on several high-end clients, and even partnered with a local builder to design model homes. But what made her happiest wasn't the money or recognition. It was knowing she had built all of it on her own terms. One afternoon, as she was preparing design samples for a new client, an older woman entered her studio. "You're Claire Matthews, right?" she asked. "I read your article. My daughter's going through something similar. Would you mind talking to her?" Claire nodded gently. "Of course," she said with a warm smile. "I'd be happy to." That conversation reminded her that success wasn't just about what she gained, it was about what she could give back. Helping others find their strength made her story feel even more meaningful. When the day ended, she turned off the lights, locked the door, and took one last look at the framed article. The reflection of her face shimmered faintly against the glass. Not the face of the woman who'd once been left outside in the cold, but of the woman who had built her own light. As she stepped into the evening air, she whispered softly, "I'm not baggage. I'm the journey." Then she smiled, walked to her car, and drove home, free, whole, and ready for everything the next chapter of her life would bring.